My name is Matt McDermott, and I'm going to be talking about how to add search capabilities to your the solution that we've been developing. I'm a 6-time SharePoint MVP. I actually had the joy of speaking here last year, and they invited me back for some odd reason. I guess I just didn't drink enough. I'm part of Aptilon, and I also train for Critical Path. You can reach me on my blog at www.ableblue.com/blog, or hit me on Twitter at MatthewMcD. I had the joy of having Wictor help me out, as well as Ben Robb. You guys have heard them talk for the last day. And what I want to talk to you about as developers is understanding why you would want to use search over simply writing your own interfaces. To be able to, if you're building a .NET application, it may be up to you to not only write all of the create, read, write, update parts of your application, but also the find, locate parts. And with SharePoint, you have this great capability built in, which is the search service application. And there's several interfaces that you get to deal with. The first one, of course, that's the US interface. That's the British interface. Okay. So we have Search Center web parts. The Search Center web parts allow you to test your queries before you ever go to code. So you can actually use the Search Center that's built in on your production environment to see if the stuff that you think is going to work is going to work. They're never going to let you deploy your own code to do that kind of testing. And so the more you know about Search Center, and the more you know about writing your own queries inside of Search Center, the better off you'll be when you start planning your final solution. There's also the Microsoft.Search.Query namespace that allows you to construct full keyword queries against content inside the SharePoint search index. You can also use FullTextSql queries with joins and where clauses and all kinds of very, very cryptic. I mean, you're coders, so you like using cryptic stuff. So you could write on one line one enormous query that brought back exactly what you wanted. But what I'll be showing you today is that the KeywordQuery interface is actually a lot easier to use and actually provides a lot of robust functionality for us. So I'm going to be focusing on the KeywordQuery namespace today. We're also going to be using the query manager to be able to actually intercept what the user thought they queried, and we're going to change it a little bit and then send it back out to the UI so that we can play some tricks. So the query manager gives you access to what the end user typed in. So if you want to construct your own special query web part, you could intercept what the user typed into the query box, and then you can reconstruct that query and send it to the SharePoint search engine. Or you can wait for those results to come back and then post-process those results. And that's what I'll be demonstrating today, is how to do a little bit of post-processing. The other powerful feature of SharePoint, and I have several clients that do this, is simply the Search Web Services. So with the Search Web Services, you can be off the box entirely. So you could write a remote application that uses SharePoint Search. You could write a desktop application or a phone application that leverages your corporate search engine in a completely disconnected application, where you're constructing a query packet, you're sending it up to SharePoint's query server, getting back XML as results, and then parsing through those results and rendering them. So if you're interested in that, there are a number of sessions at the SharePoint conference where we were talking about using Windows Phone development against SharePoint, for example. And in those sessions, we talk about using the query web services. One of the features that one of my clients uses a lot is the RecordClick method. So they have their ASP.NET website, not running SharePoint, but they're using SharePoint Search on their website to crawl their website. So SharePoint Search is their search engine. What they wanted to be able to do is still have, when a user clicks one of those links in this disconnected application, they wanted that to impact the relevance of the search results. And SharePoint does that in the Search Center by default through the regular search web parts. It calls a RecordClick method. If you call this RecordClick method from your own disconnected application, you will also be influencing the results, the future results, the future relevance of those documents that people are accessing. So pretty cool. Excuse me, pretty cool interfaces. Get some water. Empty water. Full water. Okay. When you start considering developing for search, the first question you end up asking yourself is whether I query or not. I could just use list iteration. I know exactly where my list is because I developed it. So I could put a little search box on the page, and I could just iterate through the list and not use query at all. The problem with list iteration is compared to query, it is tremendously slow. But as developers, a lot of times, one of the traps we fall into is we do not test with enough data. So in our 10-item test list, it works just fine. Then you deploy it to production, you have a 300,000 item list, and suddenly people are complaining about how slow the process is. By using query, it's fast all the time. You also have no limits on what you're able to query with search. If in your test environment, and if in your dev environment you're running it as an administrator in a default deployment, you get 20,000 list items back by default. Normal users get 5,000 list items back. So you have to consider if you're going to be doing SP queries against a list that you may go past that query threshold and result in an error. With search, we don't have that threshold limit because we're not hitting the list directly, we're hitting an index. So list throttles aren't an issue for us when we use query. But what if you take your list, which you've written your list iteration code, and it is plenty fast, and none of the rest of the stuff I've talked about matters. You deploy it to, let's say, the HR site, because they want to have a KB application for their own HR issues. And then IT has a look at that and says, you know, we could use that too. So we're going to have another list instance. And then every department in your corporation wants to have their own separate list using the same content type, using the same solution that you've developed. Every time you do a search, it's only the list that you're looking at. If we use enterprise search, I can query every single content type of KB article and pull them all back in a search center. So I can search every single list, and I can filter by content type. So this gives me the ability to scale this solution out. And we've used this in instances where we have sales organizations across a corporation, and the vice president of sales wants to know every contract that's been written today, wherever it resides in the entire farm. Since they're using a content type of contract, we're able to construct a query that says, go get me all of the contracts of content type, all of the documents of content type contract and bring those back. I don't care where they are. So if somebody's working on one on their My Site, he still sees it. Do you get that? So we're talking about the scope of enterprise search is the entire the entire farm that you've deployed for SharePoint. So if you only need single instance and list throttles don't bother you and writing iterators is your favorite thing, then you can still do that. But if you want to think global, if you want to think about the entire farm as your solution, or even multi-farm solutions where you're running enterprise search from SharePoint, as long as they're all crawled by the same index, then this becomes a multi-instance solution. There is a downside, and that's that you do not have immediate gratification. I know all of you know one or two business users that want to upload a document, check it in, and go search for it. Right? And they're like, where's my document? They're freaking out. They can't find the document. Give it 5 minutes. Take a breath. Go have a cup of coffee. You just uploaded a document. That's a half day's work for you. I know we've been making IT pro jokes in here, but I got to make sales jokes in here. So the only folks that really this impacts are the folks that are that laser focused on wanting to be able to get their stuff back right away. So what I generally do is on those content sources in SharePoint where we do need to have a more fresh index, then we kick up the crawl schedules, we kick up the incremental schedule on that web application, and try to pump up the freshness of the index. But really, that's the only downside of using SharePoint Search over your own list iterator, is that you don't get immediate gratification. You have to wait for the crawls to run. So the SharePoint Search architecture looks something like this. You have the search service application that has its search databases. There's an indexing engine that's crawling the content sources, applying iFilters, using connectors to be able to build not only a full text index of the content that you've produced, but also managed property index, which means those properties go into a SharePoint database, and we're actually able to query them by name. So in the case of the KB articles, if I want to get all the KB article content types, I simply use the managed property name content type, a colon, and then KB article as our request, and I will get back every KB article content type document. Now we're going to be using the search engine going through the search API. This is the same search API that the Search Center web parts are using, and any custom search solution that we use will use the Search Center API. The property syntax is pretty straightforward. And in 2010, we have a lot better jargon, or a lot better syntax that we can use. So in 2007, we could do property-based queries where you use the managed property name, a colon, and the value that you're seeking, and that would return results. So for instance, if I did author colon Matthew McDermott, it would pull back any documents that I was tagged as the author of. But in 2010, we can also do property restrictions. Equals is kind of a no-brainer, but if you want to know documents that were authored in the last 24 hours, then you can use a greater than and a less than to be able to get back those property restrictions, or get back those documents of type. There's Boolean support, so you can do ands and ors. Logically, everything on the search query is anded together. The only reason you would want to do an or is if you actually want to expand the scope of your query, because you would be looking for one thing or this other thing, which of course would add to your result set. We have prefix wildcard support. So if you do author colon Matt star, it's going to find Matt, Matthew, and then any name after that. But you don't have prefix, you don't have contains in KeywordQuery. You'd have to go to SqlQuery for that. And then we also have negation. So if I do a minus sign in front of a property, it's going to get all of the documents that are not authored by Matthew McDermott. So the search query syntax allows me to do, if I go to my Search Center here, if I go to my Search Center, and if I simply type article, this is just a straight keyword query. I'm using the term article. It's going to go out and find anything that is that has the word articles in it. And so the first thing you'll notice is that I'm, of course, getting back my list called articles. Title is a very powerful property. It influences relevance more than any of the other properties. And so in this case, since I searched for article, it found articles. That's my KB list. And then it's starting to find all of the pages that have articles associated with it. If I want to find only KB content, then I can type content type, colon, and this will bring back just, let me make sure I got that right. Oh, there's no space in it. That's good to know. There we go. Hang on just a sec. I'll do it the other way. So one of the troubleshooting, I'll do on-the-fly troubleshooting. How's that? One of the troubleshooting tools that I use to be able to get my to be able to determine what's going on with search, and I've got an article on how to do this, and if you're interested, I'm doing a search session tomorrow that talks about this, is how do you dump all of the results to XML? And so one of the things that you can do inside of the Search Center is you can actually produce a little troubleshooting page that lets you see the details of the content that's coming back. And in this case, what I want to find is the article content type that's in here. And what I should see is my ESPX. I'm not seeing it. So that one worked because here's the content type, K-base article. And so now if I go back here and I do content type, K-base article, it gives me back all of my articles. So this is how you can filter specifically. So if you do content type equals list item, it'll pull back just list items, documents, things like that. You can also do, using some of the out-of-the-box managed metadata properties, you can do things like isDocument. If this equals 1, then you're only going to get documents back. Okay? In SharePoint world, images are documents when they're stored in a document library. So this first one is an image. Some of these are pages, but these are all considered documents by SharePoint. If I do isDocument equals 0, it's going to get me the opposite of that, everything but a document. So you can do simple queries inside the Search Center that are exactly the same as the kinds of keyword queries that you're going to be doing under development. So it's not uncommon for me to walk into a client who wants to build a search application, and the first thing we'll do is run a whole bunch of queries in their Search Center to see if they've even done any of the back-end support that's required to make that Search Center work, or to make that search application work. So once you start deciding what your solution is going to look like, you have to decide what approach you're going to take. The most common approach that I take when I'm dealing with search and I'm going to be building a web part is I use the core search results web part and I subclass it. So the first solution that we're going to build today is going to be one that returns related articles to the article that you're viewing on the article detail page. And so because it's a simple query and the UI can already be handled by XSL based on the out-of-the-box web part, I'm going to use the core search results web part. That core search results web part, by doing a subclass of it, allows me to do a great many things, including changing the query, changing the results output, and I can still rely on the out-of-the-box UI rendering. So it behaves like a core search results web part. It just has extra stuff built in that I want it to do. And this is a tremendous thing for making minor changes. Now you can also use the keyword query. You can construct your own keyword query, but if you do, or when you do, you get to control everything because you can do whatever you want with the query. You can submit that to the search engine, but then you have to create the UI if it's a visual web part. If it's not a visual web part, then throw it away and do whatever you need to do with the results. You can do something completely different. For instance, maybe part of your solution is to take some user input, go find out if they did it right by doing a search, and then returning something else to their UI. So if you don't need a UI, this is a good solution. And it's also great for major changes or a certain special circumstance that we'll talk about in just a moment. So for our first solution, we need to create a related article search web part. And what do we know? Well, we know that our content type is K-base article. We know that the location is a specific site collection, so we could use a search scope. So before, when I was talking about one of the benefits of using query and using SharePoint Search is that you could search your entire farm. But it doesn't mean you have to. You could still create a scope that said just search HR, just search IT. So if you wanted those search experiences to be separated, you could still do that. So in our case, we're not going to use a scope. I'm just going to return results from everything that I find. And the way that we're relating articles is we're using the taxonomy. We're using the managed metadata service that Wictor set up for us earlier. Because of that, I can use a taxonomy reference. The best part of using a taxonomy reference in this case is I'm not dependent on the text of the field. So I don't care whether they typed in an English word, a French word, a German word, a Danish word. It doesn't matter. Because what I'm using is I'm using the taxonomy field reference, which is a GUID, and I'm passing that to the search engine. The search engine is going to return me results based on the GUID, not based on the string that I'm searching for. So it's instantly a multilingual solution. And then there's one other benefit that you get by using the taxonomy reference that I'll show you in the code. So our best choice is the core search results web part. We have to craft the query, which is not very difficult because Paul set up a little data manager for me so that once I get the ID of the current article, I can go out and get the taxonomy ID so I can execute my query. And then I'm going to do a little trick to change the XSL just so it looks a little bit better. So we're going to drop down into our site here. I'm going to drop down into our site. And let me show you what it looks like before we start walking through the code. So here's our article summary page. In this case, I'm going to go to my first question. My first question has the category search on it. So let me fire up, zoom it here. So it has the category search on it. This is a hierarchical managed metadata column. So under search, I also have more specific terms like SharePoint search, fast search. Okay? So if this is a general question about search, then I'll put it under the search category. But if I'm using my second question here, this one's more specific. It's about SharePoint search. So again, using the managed metadata service, whenever I create a new article, down here in my keyword field, my category field, you'll see that I have SharePoint search under topics, but if I open this out, under search, I also have fast search and SharePoint search. The reason I'm going into this is because when you see the results, it's going to be important to understand why we're seeing the number of results that we're seeing. So I'm going to back out of this, go back to my page, and so what I should see when I click on first question is down here under related articles, I see 3 articles. Because I have the second question, this one's tagged with search. The second question is SharePoint search. The need and answer quickly is fast search. And teaching my wife about SharePoint is SharePoint search. What you'll notice is that when I drop down into the more detailed questions, the number of related articles goes down, because it's excluding those top-level ones. When you do a search inside of SharePoint using the taxonomy fields, it's from the reference that you have down hierarchically. So since the other question was generically about search or the other question was about fast search, that doesn't apply to this more specific article that is related to SharePoint search. The way that we make this happen in code, so we start off with our KB related articles web part, and we subclass on the core search results web part. Then we go through, we add a couple of properties. I have a property here that just tracks my content type name so that we make it a little bit more portable in case my dev team changes the name of the content type. We also have the category field name. This is the field that we're using to store the manage metadata property. So I need to know that for my query. And then I have a Boolean field that just tracks whether or not I want to include the descendant terms. And I'll toggle that off in just a second and show you the difference. Once we build out the part, we do the subclass, then we initialize the query. When we initialize the query, we start out by using the data accessor method that we have on the K-base data context just to go get me the taxonomy field ID. This get list item category simply returns a GUID. It returns the GUID that's on the parent document. Then I go in and after I've gotten the taxonomy ID, that's this guy right here, I use link to go get me the one article, based on the article that's being passed in, because that comes in as the ID on the page. So that ID right there is what's being passed into me on the query string. So I bring that in on the query string, and then I call the taxonomy field value that gets me the GUID for the term that I'm using. Once I have that GUID, I can construct my query. And so in this case, my query is really simple. I have an if statement here, whether I'm including descendant terms or not. And this is the trick. If you want to include descendant terms, all I'm doing is constructing a string query here like I showed you in Search Center. Content type equals the content type name, in this case KB article. Then I have the field name, and I want the field name to match my category tax ID. The challenge here is that the only difference between the two queries, the one that includes descendant terms and the one that doesn't, is the one that includes descendant terms uses a pound sign. The one that doesn't include descendant terms uses a pound sign and a 0. So if you only want to return exact matches, you have that option. If you want to return children, you have that option as well. Then we handle the results. So remember we talked about that requirements document? Nowhere in the requirements document will you see that it says, oh, and by the way, if I'm sitting on an article, and now I'm just poking fun at Eric, if I'm sitting on an article like my first question, if I ran this exact query, I should get 4 documents back, right? Because my first article fits the bill. It matches that query. So what you would see if you didn't include the code I'm about to show you is you would see 4 articles over here which include the article you're looking at. So we decided to trim that out of the search results. And of course, using the core search results web part subclass, we can do that. And so what I do is I launch a query manager. So at this point, the query has come back to us. I have a results table. And so what I do is I match on I find the result, the one result that matches the path of the existing document. And when I find that result, right here, I do a remove. And so using link, again, I'm able to take that result set back. It's all XML. And I say, go find the one that matches the one you're already looking at and take that out. And then I just send it on through, and the rest of it gets processed by the search engine, and the results get rendered in the UI. So when you have a question that has no related items, like unrelated question, this one has no related items because I only have one in the category development. So ordinarily, if you ran this query, you would see the same item here. We just trim that out of the result set. So searching for subject matter experts should be no different. We know that we have people that have self-identified them as experts on their profile. We let them use the Ask Me About field, which is one of the default profile fields. And we're going to use the same term set that the article term set is using. So there's no customization. Once you've deployed the term set, it's available to the user profile. You just have to tell people how to edit their profile so they can be a subject matter expert too. That sounds pretty simple, and it is. So one possible source that you might think of is the people search results web part. Because we subclass the core search results web part, all we're doing is a people query, so let's just do that. But you can't, because it's sealed. I didn't have the sound effect. I wanted that. Or the slamming cage door. Right? No. So what we're going to do instead is use a keyword query. We're going to construct the query using what I call people syntax. And then we're going to handle the UI rendering ourselves. So when we're looking at the SME search web part, this is just a regular old web part. Okay, it's just a plain old web part. And then we're going to start building up the wiring to make it a little bit more than a plain old web part. So the first thing I have to do again is I have to grab the query string and I have to go get my article. I have to go get my article ID, and then with that I have to go get my category taxonomy ID. Same thing we did before. And then I execute a people query and pass out those search results. And this is where you do the people stuff. So in this case, we're going to create a data table, and then we're going to execute a keyword query. So this is what the core search results web part is doing for you in the background. It's doing all this wiring for you. We're going to take in the keyword text, which is simply the GUID that we just got back from our results, from the query string processing. And then we're going to execute a keyword query. And the key here, there's a couple of important points. One of them is that instead of using the ranking model for documents, we're going to be using this special GUID, which tells the search engine to use the people ranking model. This is the default people ranking model. There's 5 different ranking models associated with people, including things like social distance, and things like that. All I care about is give me back people. So I use the people ranking model. And then I go in and I turn a whole bunch of stuff off because I really just want it to take my query and do what I want with it. So for instance, I don't think anybody out there has a nickname that's a GUID except maybe Wictor. And I also don't need phonetic name matching. So I'm going to turn all of that extra processing off, enable stemming and things like that. The result types, I only want relevant results. Other kinds of result types that you could pull back would be best bets and things like that, which are completely irrelevant in the kind of search that we're doing. So I am going to sort them descending. And so I create the sort list, and I add the rank for descending, and then I add the properties that I want to pull back, account name, preferred name, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then those will be returned to me as a data table when the query runs. So then all we do, so that's creating the query. We're going to take those search results and we're going to load them. And then we do a whole bunch of processing. There's probably more than the code that I showed you. There's all of this other code that is doing the UI rendering. And so you can decide your best way of doing the UI rendering. But it really, what we wanted to end up with was the ability to choose a question and then see the results of our subject matter experts with their picture, their email address. And then we do another little trick here. And I don't have my server running right now, but my link server running right now. But you can even inject the pawn to be able to do presence on these things. And so if you want to see the code for doing that, I knew that I was only going to have an hour to show you a lot of code today. Tomorrow I'll be showing you how to do the pawn just using regular old XSL. So, so you can get all of the interaction that you want using this, this capability. And let me show you what it looks like to the end users when they're editing their own profile to kind of opt in to this solution. So I'm going to go over here to Willa's profile. I'm going to edit that. And if she wants to add herself as a developer, she drops down here to Ask Me About. And what you'll notice is that when she starts typing dev, actually let me back this one up. When she types dev, she's got two different taxonomy, or two different term stores. In order to opt in for the K-base article subject matter expert, she would choose the second one, which is the SharePoint topics that we chose to be our term set for our knowledge base. So it's a subtle difference, but if you think about it, it allows people just to either enter keywords and not play, or actually specify the term store that they're interested in, and that puts them into this subject matter expert capability. So they opt in just by editing their own user profile. Any questions about all of that?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
On the article search web part you talked about,
Yes.
You mentioned the XSL trick to render the result.
Thank you very much. Okay. So how many of you have worked with core search results web parts before? Excellent. It's fun, huh? Okay. It's not as much fun as it could be, but come to a session tomorrow. I'll show you how to make it real fun. The thing that we do is since we're subclassing the core search results web part, I can still use the XSL link property, which is down here in the most important section of the core search results web part. It's called miscellaneous. And so right down here, I have the XSL link web part, or the XSL link. And so what I've done in my solution is I've included in the modules, I've included an XSL style sheet that helps me render those results. So I know that my part is working when the icon isn't a list item icon, because all I did was really change the icon, and then I also changed the result link. So let me show you that. Inside of this XSL, because think about it. If I do a search for a knowledge base article inside of the Search Center, it's okay, this works too. So you notice the display form. What's that going to give me? It's going to give me the list form, right? Everybody hates getting search results and being sent to the list form. So what I do in the, because it takes you here, which is not what you want people to see, right? You want them to see the, let me cancel that. You want them to actually see the article details page. Am I right? So we want to make sure that that's happening. So inside the XSL, we just do that article details rewriting. And so I have what I do is I take the URL, and I wrote a little XSL template that does a KB URL rewrite. And I essentially take in a string, which is the ID of the item that they're looking for, and then I pass back, I do a replacement on that. I lowercase everything, and then I do a replacement, and I replace it with app pages article details. So it rewrites the URLs, because otherwise your search results web part would take them out of context and take them to the list item ID. So I just wrote an XSL template that rewrites that and swaps out those details. The good thing about this is now you've written it here, you can go back to your main search center and redo the XSL there. And if the content type is K-base article, you can use a consistent icon, and you can use a consistent URL to get them back into the system the way that you want. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned Search Center.
Uh-huh.
You can do the same fix in there as well.
That's what you have to do.
But if you don't have Search Center, you have the search within a site collection or a site.
The OSS search page? Yeah, that's the devil.
Right, you can't fix it.
Yeah, that's the devil. Right. So what you do is you fix the site collection. And you fix the site collection by changing the site settings for the search center to go to your main search center. And I'll show that tomorrow as well. That's part of the search administration stuff that makes the search experience better. Yeah, OSS search and advanced search pages are two of my least favorite features of SharePoint, right? Advanced search page, 25 fields, fill them all in, get no search results. Or enter a term, get refiners, 3 clicks, and you found what you're looking for. Makes a lot more sense. Okay? Paul.
A delegate control to override the search box on that site. That's typically what I would do.
Right. Come tomorrow, I'll show you a no-code way to do it. I believe my time is up. All right, so in summary, use search for reach because it allows you to take this one solution that you've created, scale it out across your organization, and still be able to find everything that people are creating. Use your search for performance. It's much faster than iterating through lists, and you won't run into any list throttle issues. Use the search server because it works both on and off the box. We talked about the XSL page. There's no reason why I couldn't use the exact same XSL from both my search center and my search part, so you really don't even have to have 2 different pages. And then all the details on that little trick for the # and #0 are on this one article called Search Taxonomy Fields on MSDN, and it goes into great detail about one of the coolest features that I discovered. So I went in after creating the K-base articles and everything, and it turns out that all of the managed metadata fields are automatically turned into managed properties. So if you've done any search stuff, you know that you have to crawl, then you have to go manage the properties, and then crawl again. Well, if you're using taxonomy fields, they're automatically created as managed properties. So it's one less piece. You notice that in my solution, nowhere in there did I have any kind of feature receiver that said, hey, go ensure that those fields were created, because SharePoint does that for me. SharePoint uses a standard naming convention. It doesn't involve GUIDs, amazingly enough, and this article talks through how to get all of that done. So I mentioned that tomorrow in Henry Moore, starting at 9 o'clock, we're doing Search Center configuration, which is kind of a basic, all of those of you that raised your hands, unless you're still scratching your head about core search results, this one's not for you. The Beyond the Search Center one goes into more detail on how to do queries, and then Agnes Molnar is doing one on your data and search properties at 11:30. So we're kind of doing a mini search set with three related sessions. Any other